She fed a dying man her last meal. She had no idea he owned the city. A wounded stranger in a dark alley. A debt that wasn't hers to pay. And a world that will swallow her whole if she doesn't learn its rules fast enough. This is the story of Nyla Brooks, the woman who walked into Seoul's most dangerous underworld with nothing but bare hands and a stubborn heart. If this story has you hooked, hit like right now, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Stay until the end. You won't regret it. Dance. The sandwich was stale. Nyla knew it before she even bit into it. Could tell from the way the plastic wrap had sweated against the bread, leaving that particular film of condensation that meant the thing had been sitting under fluorescent convenience store light for God knows how many hours. 4,001. That was what she had left after the subway fare, after the phone bill she'd paid 3 days late to avoid getting cut off entirely, after she'd sent the last of her paycheck across to Zuri's school account to cover the activity fee that the homeroom teacher had emailed about twice already. 4,001, and she spent it on a ham and cheese triangle that tasted like cardboard and regret. She ate it standing up outside the CU on Itawandero, her apron still tied around her waist because she'd been too tired to take it off, her feet so swollen inside her non-slip work shoes that she could feel her pulse in her toes. The street was quiet at this hour, past 2 in the morning on a Wednesday in February, and even the bar crowds had thinned, the last of the weekend soldiers retreating inside away from the cold. Seoul in winter had a particular kind of bite to it, not just temperature but texture, like the air itself was made of something slightly abrasive, something that got into the corners of your eyes and the back of your throat, and reminded you constantly that you were an outsider here, that warmth was something you had to earn. Nyla had been earning it for 3 years. She finished the sandwich in 4 bites, folded the triangle wrapper into a small square the way her mother used to do with napkins, some habit so deep it had survived the grief intact, and dropped it in the bin outside the store. She checked her phone. 2:17 a.m. The last bus toward Mapogu had already run. The taxi would cost more than she had, and the subway wouldn't restart until 5:30. That left one option, the shortcut through the alley system behind Noksapyeong Station, 40 minutes on foot through cold she could already feel settling into her knee joints. She started walking. The thing about Nyla Brooks was that she had a habit people mistook for bravery. She didn't flinch from things that scared her. She just didn't show it. Her mother had called it stubbornness. Her nursing school advisor, back when she'd still been enrolled, back before Zuri's diagnosis burned that possibility to the ground, had called it a clinical asset. The ability to compartmentalize. To walk into a room where someone was hemorrhaging and let your hands do what your brain calculated rather than what your stomach felt. She thought about that sometimes, walking alone at night, about how you could practice something until it stopped being courage and became just reflex, until fear was just a sensation your body noted and filed away, like hunger or cold. Tonight, she felt both. The alley she cut through was a narrow service passage behind a row of restaurants. She'd used it a dozen times before, knew the layout by feel. The dumpster on the left that smelled of fermented things even in winter, the locked metal door halfway down that led to a basement kitchen, the sharp right turn at the end that opened onto the residential street. She was at the dumpster when she heard it. Not a sound exactly, more like the absence of one. The particular weighted silence that follows a sound you didn't catch directly but your body registered anyway, the way you'll sometimes turn your head before you know why. She stopped. Her eyes adjusted. The alley was lit by a single sodium lamp at the far end, casting everything in amber shadow. The right turn she needed was 30 meters ahead. Between her and it, something was wrong with the geometry of the ground. There was a shape that hadn't been there the last time she walked this route. A shape that was wrong for cardboard, wrong for garbage, wrong for anything except... She moved closer before she consciously decided to. He was on his back with his left leg bent at an angle that meant either it was broken or he'd collapsed mid-motion and the body had just given up on maintaining positions. The suit was black and looked expensive even from where she stood, the kind of tailoring that meant something, that had structure and weight to it. The snow that had been falling lightly since midnight had already dusted the shoulders white. One hand was pressed flat against his right side. The other held a gun. Nyla stopped. The gun was pointed at her. It was a compact pistol with a cylindrical suppressor threaded onto the barrel. She recognized the shape from the Korean crime dramas Zuri liked, which struck her as a deeply stupid thing to be thinking right now. And the hand holding it was trembling, which meant either he was cold or he was losing blood fast enough that motor control was starting to go. Walk away. His Korean was precise, clipped, accented with something she couldn't immediately place, the kind of voice that expected to be obeyed. Nyla did not walk away. She stood there for one full second doing the thing her nursing school advisor had praised, and her mother had called stubbornness, running a rapid inventory. The dark stains soaking through the left side of his suit jacket, not right side, she'd been wrong, left side, which meant either abdomen or lower chest, depending on where exactly. The pallor of his face, even under the sodium light. The way his jaw was set with a kind of furious concentration that told her he was fighting the pain rather than past it, which meant he was still functional enough to be dangerous, but not by much. "You're bleeding through your suit," she said. A pause. "I said walk away." "I heard you." "Then, you're going to pass out in about 10 minutes if someone doesn't apply pressure to that wound." She took one step forward. The gun didn't waver. "Maybe sooner, given how much you've already lost. The ground under you is wet, and it's not snow." The jaw tightened. Something moved behind his eyes. Not fear, nothing she'd classify as fear, but a recalculation. She was being assessed the way you'd assess a variable that wasn't behaving according to the expected model. "You are not afraid," he said. "I'm terrified," Nyla said flatly. "I'm also a nursing school dropout with 3 years of ER observation hours, and I can tell a dangerous bleed when I see one. Those are separate facts. Now you can shoot me, which will make noise and bring attention, or you can let me do what I can with what I have. Your choice. But make it fast because you really don't have the time you think you do." The gun stayed up for another 3 seconds. Then it dropped. She moved. She untied the apron from her waist as she crossed the distance between them. Her work apron, white canvas with the restaurant logo on the bib, the one she'd had for 8 months and kept clean because presentation mattered and she needed the tips. And crouched beside him without thinking about the smell of blood on cold concrete or the way his eyes tracked her with an animal wariness that was not diminished in the slightest by the fact that he was dying. "I need to see the wound. I'm going to open your jacket." A sound that might have been a scent. She opened his jacket. The bullet had entered through the left side of his abdomen below the rib line. Exit wound at the back. She could tell from the way the fabric was torn in 2 places. Through and through, which was both better and worse than retained depending on what it had clipped on the way. The bleeding was serious, potentially fatal without intervention. Definitely fatal if he stayed lying in a snowy alley for the next hour. She folded the apron into the thickest compress she could manage and pressed it against the entry wound. He made no sound. That impressed her against her will. "Hold that," she said. She moved his hand to the compress. His grip was still strong, stronger than she'd expected for someone losing this much blood. "Press hard, like you mean it. I need to get to the exit." She worked her hands underneath him to press the second fold of apron against his back. Close work. Personal in a way that had no good social framework for 2 strangers in an alley at 2 in the morning. She could feel his breathing, controlled, deliberate. Someone who had learned or been trained or had simply survived enough to know that panic cost oxygen, cost clarity, cost survival. "What is your name?" he asked. "Nyla. American. South Side Chicago, originally." She adjusted the pressure. "Don't talk. It moves your diaphragm." He went quiet. She worked. For 6 minutes she held pressure on both wounds, counting in the way she'd been taught. Not just seconds, but quality of seconds. Watching the bleed rate slow or not slow. Watching his color. Watching the fine tremor in the hand that was now resting on the concrete beside her knee. The gun was still within his reach. She noticed that. He had not put it away. After the 6th minute, she sat back. "You need a hospital." "No." "The bleeding's slowing, but it hasn't stopped. If you have a vehicle or people who can..." "No hospital." The eyes were hard, and she understood from the quality of that hardness that this was not negotiable, not because he was afraid of hospitals, but because hospitals meant records, and records meant something worse than the wound. She exhaled, looked at the soaked apron, looked at him. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the second half of the ham and cheese triangle she hadn't finished yet. She'd saved half out of habit, The same habit that had meant splitting everything with Zuri for as long as she could remember, and held it out. He looked at it. He looked at her. "You are giving me your food," he said. Not a question, something else. "You need blood sugar. It's not much, but it's what I have." She kept her hand steady. "And yes, I know how it looks. Just eat it." He took it. He ate it without comment, with the focused efficiency of a man who understood that the body was a system requiring maintenance, regardless of pride. "My phone battery is at 4%, she said. "When I leave here, I'm going to be in a blackout zone until I get to the main road. I can't call anyone for you. If you have people, you need to call them yourself. Right now, not in 10 minutes. He was already reaching for something inside his jacket. A phone. He made a call in Korean too fast and too quiet for her to follow. She had conversational Korean, had spent 18 months learning it, but he was speaking in a register and at a speed that told her this was not conversational. She stood. "Keep pressure on it. Don't lie flat. If you can get your back against the wall, do it. Reduces pooling." She looked at him one last time. The expensive suit, the gun, the absolute stillness with which he regarded her, as though she were something he was still trying to categorize. "People will come?" "Yes." "Then you'll be fine." She walked to the end of the alley. At the corner, she stopped and looked back. She didn't know why. He was watching her, still. The sodium lamp made his face into something half shadow, and in that light he looked like a man who had not been looked at, genuinely looked at, in a very long time. She turned the corner and walked home in the cold. She did not think about him after that. This was not because it hadn't been strange. It had been deeply strange. The gun, the blood, the half sandwich she'd handed over like she had anything to spare. But Nyla's life had trained her to close compartments firmly and move on to the next task, because the next task was always there and it did not wait. The next task, the following morning, was Zuri. Kang Zuri? She'd taken to calling her that sometimes, a private joke between them that referenced the amount of Zuri's soul that had been absorbed by Korean pop culture since they'd arrived in Seoul, was 16. Asthmatic in the way that had been manageable in Chicago and became considerably less manageable in Seoul's particular winter air quality. And at 7:15 in the morning was sitting at the kitchen table of their 2-room apartment in Mapo-gu, eating instant ramen and watching a video on her phone with earbuds in, which meant she would not hear anything Nyla said until she physically tapped her on the shoulder. Nyla tapped her on the shoulder. Zuri pulled out one earbud. "You look like death." "Good morning to you too." "Did you sleep?" 4 hours. Zuri made the face she made when something was both unsurprising and unacceptable. She had a vocabulary of faces that communicated entire paragraphs. Their mother's gift, passed down and refined. "You have the lunch shift again today? And the dinner shift?" Nyla poured water from the kettle into a mug and stood at the counter, drinking it plain. The coffee tin was empty. She hadn't written it on the list. "I need you to pick up your inhaler prescription after school. The pharmacy on Sinchon Row, not the one by the station. The other one is cheaper." "I know which one." "And don't forget your mask. The air quality index today is..." "Nyla." Zuri gave her the other face. The one that said, "I am 16, not 6. "I got it. I know you do." She stood there drinking hot water and watching her sister eat ramyeon at 7 in the morning and felt the particular quality of love that had no language adequate for it, the kind that was made mostly of exhaustion and terror, and the absolute inability to imagine any alternative. Their father had come to Seoul first. Marcus Brooks, former long-haul trucker, compulsive gambler, man of large gestures and larger absences, had arrived 2 years ahead of them chasing a business opportunity that had turned into 3 others and then into silence. When the calls stopped coming, Nyla had used the last of what she'd saved to buy 2 one-way tickets to Seoul to find out why. What she'd found instead was an empty apartment, a note that was half apology and half instruction, and a debt notice in Korean she'd needed 3 separate people to help her translate. She had not found their father. She had found a city that would let her work herself down to the bone if she was willing, and she had been willing, because Zuri's school was good, and Zuri's Korean was better than hers now. And Zuri's lungs, paradoxically, handled the Korean winters more manageably than the Chicago ones, as long as she stayed medicated, which required money, which required Nyla's 16-hour shifts. This was the logic. It was not a good logic. but it held. The next 3 weeks passed in the way that weeks passed for Nyla Brooks, in the space between shifts, in the margins between the grocery receipt and the bank balance, in the brief flat darkness of 4-hour sleeps. She did not think about the man in the alley. When she passed the turning on her way home, she sometimes clocked it and moved on. He was fine, or he wasn't. Either way, it wasn't hers. On a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the alley, she came home from the lunch shift at 4:30 to find the door of their apartment open. She stood on the landing for a moment with her key in her hand. The door was not damaged. The lock had not been forced. It was simply open, pushed in far enough that she could hear voices inside, men's voices, more than two, speaking Korean in the flat register that meant business rather than conversation. Nyla walked in. There were 4 of them. Broad-shouldered men in the kind of padded winter coats that were too thick and too uniform to be purely fashion. 2 were standing near the kitchen, one was by the window, and one was very close to Zuri, who was sitting on the couch with her hands in her lap and her face entirely still in the way it went when she was frightened and trying not to show it. Nyla looked at the one nearest her sister. "Get away from her," she said in Korean. He turned and looked at her the way you'd look at a noise you were mildly curious about. He was in his 30s, heavy in the jaw, with a kind of patient brutality about him that she'd seen before in other contexts. He did not move away from Zuri. The one by the window spoke. His Korean was rougher, more dialectal. "You're Marcus Brooks' daughter. Where is he?" From the one near the kitchen, the question directed at Nyla, but his eyes still on the apartment as though appraising it. "I don't know where my father is," Nyla said. "We haven't had contact in over a year." "He owes a significant debt," the window one said. "Gambling. Not to us directly, to a man who owed our organization. The debt was transferred. You understand how this works?" She understood exactly how this worked. She had understood how it worked since the moment she'd seen her father's note 18 months ago. She had just not expected to be standing in the conversation this soon, this directly. "I don't have money," she said. "We know you don't." He looked at Zuri, then back at Nyla. "There are other arrangements." The word arrangements landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Zuri's hands tightened in her lap. Nyla felt the cold she'd been holding at the back of her chest for 3 years compress itself into something very small and very hard. "You touch her," she said, in Korean that was slower and more careful than usual because she needed every syllable to land. "And I will—" "You'll what?" The jaw-heavy one smiled, not with warmth. "You're a waitress. You work 16-hour shifts and you still can't pay rent on time. Your father ran away. Your sister needs medication that costs—" He named a figure that made something in Nyla's throat go tight. "Every month. You have nothing to leverage, so the question is not what you will do. The question is how this gets resolved." He took one step toward Nyla. The apartment door, which had been standing open behind her, hit the wall. Not violently, not with a crash or a kick. It simply opened wider, with the kind of unhurried deliberateness that is sometimes more frightening than any amount of force. 3 men walked in first, then a 4th. Then a 5th. They wore black, all of them, and they moved with the coordinated quiet of people who had trained together for a long time. And then, behind them, Kang Tae-hyun walked through the door. Nyla recognized him from his stillness, the same absolute stillness she'd cataloged in the alley 3 weeks ago, the quality that made you aware of it precisely because it contrasted with everything around him. He was taller than she'd registered. The suit was charcoal gray today, impeccably fitted, the overcoat open. His face was composed. Not relaxed, not tense. Composed, like a thing that had been arranged. He did not look at Nyla. He looked at the 4 men, and what happened in his gaze as he did was not rage. It was something quieter and more absolute, the expression of a man whose arithmetic had already been completed before he entered the room. The one by the window said something sharp in dialect Korean. 2 of his companions stepped forward. What happened next took perhaps 40 seconds. Nyla had seen violence before, had grown up in a neighborhood where it was not theoretical, had worked ER observation hours where its results were wheeled in on gurneys. She had never seen it administered like this, efficiently, without theater, with the flat economy of people for whom this was simply skilled labor. The 4 men who had been in the apartment were on the floor in less than a minute, not dead. She noted that, even in the shock of it, that the blows had been calibrated. Disabled, not killed. Whether that distinction was permanent, she couldn't determine. Silence returned to the apartment. Taehyun straightened his cuffs. He turned to look at Zuri first, a brief clinical assessment, then at Nyla. "Are you injured?" he asked. His voice was exactly as she remembered it, precise, clipped, expecting to be obeyed. "No," she said. "Good." He looked around the apartment with an expression that was hard to read. Not distaste, not exactly, but the look of a man cataloging a great deal of information simultaneously. Then he looked back at her. "I know who you are," Nyla said. Something shifted in his expression, just fractionally. "How?" Not a question. "I've been in Seoul 3 years. I hear things." She had heard the name Kang Tae-hyun, mostly in the way you heard names that people lowered their voices for. Mentioned sideways, mentioned briefly, the kind of name that functioned more as a category than a person. "And I know that whatever you think my father did, your father sold my organization's internal security protocols to the Beck Syndicate," Tae-hyun said. His voice had the quality of something that had been stated many times and was no longer inflected. 6 men who followed my orders died because of the intelligence he provided. I was the 7th target. You found me before I became a statistic. Nyla felt the information settle over her like cold water. She thought about the alley, the blood-soaked suit, the gun held steady in a hand that was shaking. "I came to repay a debt," she said. Not a question either. Taehyun was quiet for exactly 1 second. "That is not why I came," he said. The temperature in the room changed, or seemed to. He looked at her steadily. Not the way the jaw-heavy man had looked at her, not as inventory, but with the full focus of a man who was rarely in a room with something he had not already categorized. "Your father incurred an obligation that requires resolution," he said. "Since he is not present, and since the matter has now become complicated," a slight emphasis on the word, a glance at the men on the floor, "I am arranging a resolution." "Which is what exactly?" "You and your sister will come with me." Zuri made a sound from the couch. Not words, just a sound that meant absolutely not. Nyla did not look away from Tae-hyun. "That's not a resolution. That's a different problem." "It is a different problem that I'm in a position to solve," he said, "whereas the problem currently standing between you and a very unpleasant arrangement," he indicated briefly the men on the floor, "required my involvement to resolve. These men work for Park Dong-soo, who works for 3 other parties, who will send others when these 4 don't report. Tonight, or tomorrow at the latest." "Bon Gomsted," he paused. "You have a sister who requires medication, a father whose debts will follow you regardless of your involvement, and no resources sufficient to manage either circumstance." He was not wrong. She hated that he was not wrong. "You're not offering us protection," she said. "You're offering us a different cage." Something moved across his face. Not offense, not quite. Something more like recognition. "I am offering you a cage with a better class of problem," he said. "The choice is yours, but make it fast." He turned away from her, spoke briefly to 2 of his men in Korean that was too low to catch. 2 of them moved to the men on the floor. Nyla noted that they handled the incapacitated men carefully, checking airways, checking pulses, while 2 others moved toward the door. Nyla turned and looked at Zuri. Zuri's face was unreadable in the way it went when she was doing math she didn't like the answer to. She held Nyla's gaze for a moment. Then she looked at the men on the floor, then back at her sister. "Nyla," she said. "I know. Is he? I don't know." Nyla exhaled, looked around the apartment, the 2 rooms they'd scraped together, the grocery list on the counter, Zuri's school bag by the door, the inhaler on the kitchen table, the inhaler that cost more than a week of tips. "Start packing a bag, the important things. Don't worry about size." Zuri stood, moved toward the bedroom, stopped at the doorway. "Nyla? Are you sure?" Nyla thought about the alley, about holding pressure on a wound in the cold while a dying man held a gun within reach and chose not to use it, about the way he'd taken the half sandwich without comment, with the focused efficiency of someone who understood that the body required maintenance regardless of pride. She thought about what Tae-hyun had said. "You were the only person who ever saw a dying man instead of a mafia boss." She hadn't known she was doing that. She'd just been doing what the situation required. No, she said honestly. Pack the bag anyway. Done. The estate was not what she had expected. She had constructed something in her mind on the drive. They'd taken 2 vehicles, black SUVs, blacked-out windows, the kind of transport that made the city slide past like a film with the sound off. And the thing she'd constructed was something severe, something institutional, walls and gates, and the particular architecture of control. What she found instead was a house, or rather, what read as a house, even though it was large enough to technically be classified as something else. It sat on a rise above the Han River, partly obscured by landscaped grounds that were doing their winter best. Bare trees, frozen paths, the distant glitter of Seoul's skyline compressed into a single horizontal glowing band below them. The building itself was low and deliberate, glass and stone, and a restraint about it that read as confidence rather than modesty. They were shown to rooms on the 2nd floor, a suite with 2 connected bedrooms. Good heat, clean lines. No locks on the inside of the bedroom doors. Nyla checked immediately, but the suite's outer door could be locked from within. She locked it. Zuri, who had said almost nothing during the drive, sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands. So we're in a Korean mob boss's house, she said. Yes. Because Dad. Yes. Zuri nodded slowly. Dad's going to owe me so much for this. Nyla sat on the floor with her back against the locked door because her body had decided that standing was no longer a reasonable request, and looked at her sister and felt that same compressed thing in her chest that was love made of exhaustion and terror. I'm sorry, she said. Zuri looked up. For what? For all of this? For, she gestured, a vague motion that was meant to indicate the last 3 years and the 16-hour shifts and the 4001 sandwiches and the gambling debts and the empty apartment their father had left. All of this. Zuri was quiet for a moment. You found me when I was sick, she said finally. You dropped out of school. You came to another country. You held a compress on a mob boss's gunshot wound in an alley at 2 a.m. She tilted her head. None of that is your fault to apologize for. I know. Then stop. Neela put her head back against the door, closed her eyes. For the first time in she couldn't remember how long, she did not have a next task. There was nothing immediately required of her. She was in a locked room in a stranger's house with her sister and a debt she hadn't incurred in a situation she had no map for. Outside the locked door, somewhere in the house, Kang Tae-hyun was presumably doing whatever Kang Tae-hyun did. She thought about his face when he'd walked through their apartment door. The absolute absence of theatrics, the efficiency of what had followed, and then far quieter underneath that, the thing she couldn't entirely account for, the way he had checked if she was injured before anything else. She didn't know what to do with that information yet. She filed it in a compartment and left it there. She was asleep before she'd decided to be. In the morning, there was food. A tray outside the suite door. She found it when she unlocked and cracked the door at 6:15. Proper food, rice, soup, side dishes, the kind of spread that took time. Not restaurant food, not catered food. Someone had cooked this. Nyla brought it inside, woke Zuri, and they sat on the floor eating it with the strange, focused gratitude of people who were more hungry than they'd realized. Zuri ate 3 bowls of rice. Don't read anything into this, Nyla said. I'm just eating. I mean all of it. The house, the food, I know, Zuri said. I grew up with you, Nyla. I know how to not read things. She set down her chopsticks. But can I say one thing? Go ahead. The heat in here is amazing, like, genuinely. I slept 8 hours. My lungs feel fine. She looked at the windows, at the view of the river visible through them in the early gray winter light. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just noting that so far the mob boss's house is better for my respiratory system than our apartment. Nyla stared at her. Zuri picked up her chopsticks again. I'm just noting it. Odd. Tae-hyun did not come to her that first day, or the second. The house had staff, a small household staff, economical and quiet, who appeared to communicate almost entirely in proximity and timing rather than words. Meals were delivered. The suite was maintained. When Nyla emerged on the 3rd morning and asked, in careful Korean, whether there was somewhere she could wash clothes, A woman in her 50s who had the compressed efficiency of someone who had worked in private households for decades showed her to a laundry room without comment or transaction. On the fourth day, a younger woman, Tae-hyun's assistant, she understood, a controlled person in her late 20s named Cha Min-young, came to the suite door and explained, with professional courtesy, that Zuri had been assessed by a physician and that her prescription could be filled on site going forward. That there was a school arrangement being coordinated, pending Nyla's approval, that would allow Zuri to continue her academic year without disruption. That Nyla herself was welcome to use any part of the house that was not otherwise indicated. "And what about the rest of it?" Nyla said. Cha Min-young looked at her with the careful expression of someone answering only the questions they'd been authorized to answer. "He will speak with you when he's ready." "That's not actually reassuring." "No," Cha Min-young agreed mildly. "I don't imagine it is." She left. Nyla went to the kitchen, made herself coffee with the machine she'd spent 20 minutes decoding on day 2, and took it to the window that looked south over the river. The city shimmered in the cold air below. She had been in Seoul 3 years, and she had never seen it from this angle, from this height. It looked different. Not smaller, that was the word people always used about cities seen from above, but more organized, more legible, like a text that had too many words at street level and only resolved into meaning when you stepped back far enough. She thought about her father, Marcus Brooks, former long-haul trucker, man of large gestures and larger absences, had arrived in Seoul 2 years ahead of them. She had told herself for 18 months that his silence was shame or fear or just the particular blankness that fell over him when things went wrong. The same blankness she'd watched fill him up after her mother died. She had told herself he was alive and frightened and hiding. She had not let herself consider the alternative. She considered it now, standing at the window with her coffee cooling around her hands. On the 5th day, Tae-hyun found her in the library. She hadn't been looking for it. She'd taken a different hallway on the way back from the laundry room and found herself in a room she hadn't been in before. High-ceilinged, lined on 3 walls with bookshelves that reached the ceiling, a reading table in the center. The books were a mix of Korean and English, organized with the same restraint as everything else in the house. Not for display, for use. She had been standing at one of the shelves, running her finger along the spines when the door opened. Tae-hyun looked at her without surprise. He was in a dark sweater today, no tie, and the sight of him without the full architecture of the suit was briefly disorienting. He looked more human, fractionally, while managing to be no less contained. "You read?" he said. "Yes." "Medical texts?" She turned. He had nodded at the section of shelf nearest her. She hadn't registered it, but the books she'd been touching were indeed medical. Pharmacology. Anatomy. A clinical procedure manual. "Old habit," she said. He moved into the room and stood at the table, not sitting, not approaching. The distance between them felt deliberate. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You owe me several." Something that might, in another face, have been the precursor to a smile. In his, it was just a slight alteration in the set of his jaw. "Your father's situation is more complicated than I initially represented." Nyla set the book she'd been holding back on the shelf. Faced him fully. "How complicated?" "I have information that suggests Marcus Brooks may not have been the primary source of the intelligence breach." He said it flatly, without apology for the previous version, without drama. "There are inconsistencies in the timeline that I am currently examining." Nyla felt the room tilt slightly. "You said 6 men died." "Yes." "Because of intelligence he provided." "Because of intelligence I was told he provided," Tae-hyun said, and the correction was precise enough to be its own kind of statement. "I have spent 3 years operating on that understanding. I am now less certain of it." Nyla stared at him. "What does less certain mean?" "It means I may have been given information that was designed to look correct." "By who?" Tae-hyun was quiet for a moment. A different quality of quiet from before. Not the containment of a man conserving energy, but the measured pause of someone choosing the borders of what they were willing to say. "That is what I am trying to determine," he said. She wanted to push. She could feel the questions stacking up behind her tongue, about her father, about the debt, about what exactly had happened in the months before Tae-hyun turned up bleeding in the alley. But she was also good at reading the shape of a conversation, and the shape of this one told her that she was being given something carefully, in controlled amounts, and that pushing would close it rather than open it. She looked at him. "My father," she said. "Do you know if he's alive?" The pause that followed was the longest he had given her. "I don't know," he said. It was the most honest answer she had received from anyone in 3 years on the subject of Marcus Brooks, and it cost her more than she'd expected. The simple finality of "I don't know" coming from the one person in her proximity who would have had access to that information. She turned back to the bookshelves. "I'd like to use the library," she said, "when I'm not in the way." Another pause. "You're not in the way." She heard him cross to the door, heard it open. "Nyla." He said her name the way he'd said it in the alley, as though he'd been carrying it around since then, examining it. She didn't turn around. "The men who came to your apartment," he said. "They work for Park Dong-soo. Park Dong-soo receives direction from the Beck Syndicate. They sent those men specifically because someone told them you were connected to me." Another pause. "They shouldn't have known that. I have not been careless with that information." She turned then. His face in the library light was not soft, nothing as straightforward as soft, but legible in a way it hadn't been before, like the city seen from above. Too many words at street level. "Meaning someone in your organization told them," she said. "Meaning," he said, "that the problem I am attempting to resolve is closer to me than I had believed." He left. Nyla stood in the library for a long time after the door clicked shut. Outside the tall windows, Seoul glittered below the estate like a circuit board running hot, and somewhere in its grid of lit windows and moving vehicles, the same person who had sold Tae-hyun's location to the men who'd nearly killed him was still sitting inside his inner circle, watching and waiting. And now they knew she was here. She pulled a chair from the reading table, sat down, and opened the pharmacology text she'd been holding when he walked in, because her hands needed something to do while her mind worked. And what her mind was working on was this. The man who had just walked out of the room was not who she had thought he was in the alley, but he was also not who the city's whisper network had constructed him to be. He was something that didn't have a clean category yet. She was not sure if that was better or worse than the alternatives. And 3 weeks later, when a half-dead man was deposited outside the estate gates at 2 a.m. with his hands zip-tied and his face beaten past easy recognition, it would be Nyla who identified him first, recognized the specific way Marcus Brooks held his shoulders even when everything else about him had been destroyed. And it would be that moment, standing at the gates in the winter dark while Tae-hyun's men moved around her and her father's eyes found hers, and he tried to speak through broken teeth, that everything she had been told about why she was here would begin, piece by piece, to come apart. They brought Marcus Brooks inside through the side entrance. Nyla knew it was him before she could see his face. It was the shoulders. She had told Tae-hyun's men this when they'd come to get her, had said, "I need to see him in Korean," that was sharper than usual because her heart was doing something loud and inconvenient in her chest. And they'd taken her down the back stairs and through the utility corridor and out into the frozen grounds where the gate lights were on, and 3 vehicles were parked at angles that suggested urgency rather than planning. She'd seen the figure on the ground between 2 of Tae-hyun's men from 20 meters away, and she'd known, even destroyed, even folded in on himself the way he was. The specific geometry of Marcus Brooks carrying weight he'd never learned to put down. "Dad," she said. He lifted his head. His face was a record of something sustained over time. Not one beating, but the accumulated geography of weeks, maybe longer. The left eye was swollen shut. The nose had been broken and had begun to set wrong. There was a cut across his jaw that had been closed with tape so old it was peeling at the edges, and beneath it the skin had the yellowish tinge of a wound infected and then treated and then reopened. He was in clothes that had once been decent and were now just coverings, but his right eye found her, and it was still his eye. Still had that particular quality of a man who knew he'd done wrong and was bracing for the accounting. "Nyla, baby," he said. His voice was wrecked. "I'm sorry." "Later," she said, because Tae-hyun was there, had come down behind her with Min Young at his shoulder and 2 men she hadn't seen before, and the air between all of them was the kind that preceded decisions being made about the shape of the next several hours. Tae-hyun looked at Marcus for a long time without speaking. Marcus looked back, the right eye steady, or as steady as a man could manage in his condition. "Kang," he said. Marcus Brooks. Taehyun's voice was exactly what it always was. Controlled, precise, giving nothing. You have been alive this entire time. I have. You were not executed by the Baek Syndicate. No. You allowed me to believe you were. Marcus closed the eye, opened it again. I allowed everyone to believe I was. That was the point. Something shifted in Taehyun's face, not visible to anyone who hadn't spent weeks in proximity to it, learning its minor geography. Neela caught it, a tightening at the corner of the jaw, an adjustment in the eyes that was not quite emotion and not quite its absence. Get him inside, he said. They put Marcus in a room on the ground floor that was not the suite where Nyla and Zuri were staying. A smaller room, spare, with a single window and a cot and a lamp. Not a cell. Not quite. The door had no lock on the outside, which Nyla noted and suspected was deliberate. Taehyun was making a statement about categories. She sat with her father while one of the house staff, not a doctor, not yet, brought hot water and clean cloths and the kind of basic medical supplies that told her Taehyun's household was prepared for this kind of circumstance more routinely than most. Marcus let her clean the cut on his jaw without protest. His hands, she noticed, were worse than his face. The knuckles on both had the layered scar tissue of repeated injury, and 2 fingers on the left hand had been broken and healed without proper setting. How long? She said. 3 months in one location, before that moving. He hissed when she pressed the cloth to the jaw cut. They moved me a lot at first. I think they thought I'd try to get word out. Would you have? A pause. I tried. Twice. He looked at his hands. Didn't work. Dad. She sat back. Looked at him. Really looked at him. The way she'd looked at strangers in the ER, with the part of herself that cataloged damage without editorializing. He was thinner than she'd ever seen him. The gambler's restless energy she'd known her whole life had been replaced by something slower, more careful, the way animals moved after prolonged captivity. Why did you come here? To Seoul? What actually happened? He was quiet for a moment that had several things in it. Business opportunity, he said. That part was true. Guy I knew from Incheon, he had a freight logistics setup, wanted an American partner for the documentation side. I came out. He shifted on the cot. Then I got into debt. You know how I get. Yes. The debt was with local operators first, small stuff. Then it got transferred, the way those things get transferred, up the chain, and then a man from the Baek Syndicate came to see me. He exhaled. The exhale had a depth to it that suggested it had been a long time since he'd had space to breathe out fully. Told me I could clear my debt. All I needed to do was provide certain information about Kang Taehyun's organization, schedules, meeting locations. And you agreed. I didn't agree. His right eye came up to her. I pretended to agree, because by that point I'd done enough reading about the Baek Syndicate to know that clearing the debt wasn't actually going to be the end of it. These people don't let you walk away clean. I needed to give them something that looked good enough to buy me time. Nayla set the cloth down. So you gave them false information. I gave them a meeting location. He nodded. Except I changed it. The real meeting Taehyun had scheduled was on the 14th. I told them the 12th, different location. He paused. I thought that would give his people time to figure out there was a leak without anyone getting hurt. Someone still got hurt, Nyla said. I know. The words were flat and heavy. I don't know how. I gave them the wrong location, the wrong date. I don't understand how they found the real one. The silence in the room was the kind that had information in it. Nyla heard it. Someone else told them, she said. Marcus looked at her. Then he nodded, once, and the weight of it, what it meant, what it implied about the shape of the last 3 years, settled over both of them like something physical. That's what I think, he said. Us. She found Taehyun in the study at the end of the East Hall. She'd learned the house's geography over 5 weeks, had mapped it the way she mapped everything useful, quietly, and without announcing the activity. She knocked once and didn't wait for an answer. He was at the desk. There were papers on it, photographs, what looked like organizational charts with certain sections heavily annotated. He looked up when she entered and did not look surprised, which meant he'd expected this conversation and had perhaps not expected to initiate it himself. He didn't betray you, she said. Taehyun set down the pen. Sit down. I don't want to sit down. He gave them false information. Someone else in your organization gave them the real location. You spent 3 years hunting a man who was trying to protect you and your people, and now he's on a cot in your ground floor looking like he spent 3 months being used as furniture by the Beck Syndicate. She stopped. Her voice had gotten away from her slightly. Not loud, not broken, but faster than she usually let it get, with an edge on it that she was not entirely in control of. So I need you to tell me what you're going to do with that information. Taehyun was quiet. Sit down, he said again. Not a command this time. Something different. She sat. He pushed one of the photographs across the desk toward her. It was a surveillance photo, grainy, time-stamped, taken from a distance. It showed 2 men at an outdoor table at what looked like a rooftop restaurant. One of the men she didn't recognize, the other one she'd seen every day since she arrived at the estate. Seo Jun-woo. She'd met Taehyun's cousin on her 3rd day here, a broad-shouldered man in his mid-30s with an easy manner that she'd clocked immediately as performance, the kind of ease that required active maintenance. He'd been courteous to her in the way that people were courteous when courtesy was a strategy. He'd brought Zuri a gift on the 2nd week, a language-learning tablet, a good one, expensive, that had struck her at the time as slightly over-calibrated for someone who barely knew them. She looked at the photograph, at the man sitting across from Jun-woo. Who is the other man? She said. Baek Sung-min, Taehyun said, Deputy Director of Beck Syndicate Operations. A pause. This photograph was taken 11 days before the night you found me in the alley. Neela looked up. Taehyun's face was composed. So composed it was almost painful to look at. The controlled flatness of a man holding a very large amount of something very heavy at a very specific distance. You've known, she said. I've suspected. He took the photograph back. Suspicion and knowledge are not the same thing. I needed evidence that could not be explained away by coincidence. In the last week, I have found 3 additional instances of compromised intelligence that can only be accounted for by someone with Jun-woo's access level. Does he know you suspect him? No. Are you sure? The pause before his answer was a half-second longer than usual, and that half-second contained multitudes. I am less certain of many things than I was a month ago, he said. Nyla looked at the desk, at the papers, the photographs, the annotated charts. Weeks of work. The careful archaeology of a betrayal being excavated layer by layer. He was at the estate when those men came to my apartment, she said. Yes. He would have known I was here, the connection between us. Yes. So he sent them. Almost certainly. Taehyun picked up the pen and set it down again, a motion that was as close to a tell as she'd ever seen from him. Which means he also knows they failed, and that your father has arrived here. He looked at her. He will not wait indefinitely to act on that information. Nyla felt the cold that lived in her chest compress further. Then what are you waiting for? She said. Certainty, he said. Not for my own satisfaction. Because Jun-woo is connected to 43 people inside this organization who are loyal to him specifically. If I move without sufficient evidence, I fracture my own structure at a moment when the Beck Syndicate is actively looking for fractures to exploit. He paused. I am waiting for him to make one more move that I can document. And if he makes a different kind of move first? Taehyun looked at her steadily. That is the risk I am managing. That's not actually reassuring, she said. She was almost certain she'd said those exact words to Min Young 3 weeks ago. This time, something shifted in Taehyun's face. Something small and real, and not entirely controlled. Almost a smile. No, he said. I don't imagine it is. She was halfway up the stairs when Jun-woo found her. Not by accident. She understood that immediately. The way he was positioned at the top of the staircase, leaning against the wall with a casualness that was the same practice performance she'd clocked on day 3, told her he'd been waiting. Had probably seen her go into Taehyun's study and timed his exit for when she'd leave. You were with him a long time, Jun-woo said. He had things to explain, Nyla said. She kept moving up the stairs. About your father? She stopped. One step below the landing, which put her eye level with his chin. She looked up. His face was pleasant in the particular way of faces that had learned pleasantness as a tool. "What do you know about my father?" she said. Junwoo lifted his shoulders. "Only that he arrived last night. Taehyun hasn't briefed me yet." A smile. "That's unusual. He normally keeps me current." "Maybe he's been busy." "Maybe." He studied her with the quality of someone conducting an assessment they were pretending was casual conversation. "You've settled in well. Zuri seems happy." The mention of Zuri's name in his mouth hit something at the base of her spine. "It's good for Taehyun to have people around. He's been very alone." "That's an interesting way to phrase it," she said. "How would you phrase it?" She looked at him for a moment, long enough to be deliberate without being openly hostile, and then continued up the stairs past him. "I wouldn't," she said. She heard him behind her, not following, just standing there, watching her go. She did not run. She walked at a measured pace down the hallway to the suite, unlocked the door, locked it again behind her, and stood with her back against it in the dark for 40 seconds, while her heart did the thing it had been doing since she'd found her father at the gate. Zuri was asleep. Neela could hear her breathing from the connecting door. The particular rhythm of it, the slight audible effort that had been less since they'd come here, since the medication had been consistent and the air quality had been better, and the cold hadn't been getting into a two-room apartment through gaps in the window frames. She stood in the dark and thought about Junwoo's face, and about the photograph on Taehyun's desk, and about the 43 men who were loyal specifically to him, and about what one more move might look like, and how much time there was before it happened. Not much, was her assessment. Not much at all. The answer arrived at 3 in the morning when someone cut the power to the east wing. Nyla was awake. She'd been awake since 11, lying in the dark, running the same variables in rotation, a habit from the years when Zuri's asthma had made nighttime unreliable, and you learned to stay close to consciousness rather than surrender to it. When the lights went out, she was already sitting up. She did not scream. She did not wait. She crossed to Zuri's door in the dark by memory. 7 steps, slight left, doorframe, and put her hand on her sister's shoulder. "Hey." Soft, firm. "Wake up." Zuri was a good waker, always had been. That too was a habit the childhood had installed. She came up fast and quiet. "What?" "Power's out. Don't talk loud." Nyla found her hand in the dark. "Get your shoes on." While Zuri found her shoes, Nyla moved to the suite's outer door and put her ear against it. Footsteps in the hallway. Multiple sets. Moving with that particular controlled urgency that was not running but was not walking either. The movement of people trying to cover ground quickly without making sound. She recognized it. It was not the movement of Taehyun's household staff responding to a power failure. She stepped back from the door. "Nyla," Zuri whispered. "I hear it." Options. The suite's outer door, the window. Second floor, 12-foot drop onto frozen ground, Zuri's ankles. The connecting bathroom that shared a wall with the room next to theirs, which she'd noted weeks ago had a ventilation panel above the sink that communicated with the hallway utility run. She chose the ventilation panel. "Bathroom," she said. "Come on." She got Zuri into this bathroom and locked the door behind them and stood on the edge of the tub to reach the ventilation cover. Her hands were cold, and the screws had been painted over, and she stripped her thumbnail. Getting the first one loose, but she kept going because the footsteps in the hallway had stopped, and that was worse than footsteps, much worse, because it meant whoever they were had reached a destination and were now making decisions. The cover came free. "You first," she whispered to Zuri. "Go straight. Turn right at the junction. There should be a drop panel above the linen closet at the end of the hall." "How do you know that?" "I looked." She cupped her hands into a step. "Go." Zuri went. Had always trusted her, Neela thought, not blindly but with the particular confidence of someone who'd been carried through enough tight spots to have data. She went up and into the duct, and Nyla followed and pulled the cover back into place behind them as best she could from inside, which was not very well but was better than nothing. The duct was metal and cold, and just wide enough for a person to crawl through if that person was not large. Zuri moved ahead of her in the dark. Nyla moved her hands and knees by feel and tried to breathe slowly enough that the sound didn't carry. Below them, through the thin metal, she heard the suite's outer door open. She heard voices. 2 of them. Korean, low, and then a third voice that she recognized with a clarity that landed in her chest like something blunt. Junwoo. He was giving instructions in a register she'd never heard from him before. Flat, rapid, stripped of the practiced ease entirely. This was the voice underneath the performance. This was what he actually sounded like. She kept moving. The right turn. The drop panel above the linen closet. She pressed her palm against it and felt it give slightly. Hinged, not screwed, which meant it would make noise when it opened. She pressed her ear to the metal and listened for 30 seconds. Nothing directly below. She pushed it open. The hallway was dark, but not completely. The emergency strip lighting at floor level had come on, giving everything a low red-tinted illumination that was enough to see shapes by. The linen closet was at the end of the corridor that led to the main staircase. The main staircase led down to the entrance hall, which led to the side door, which led to the grounds. She helped Zuri down, looked at her face in the red half-dark, frightened, which was correct, but also focused, also with the set of the jaw that said she was managing the fear rather than consumed by it. Their mother's face, doing that. Their mother who had died of a thing that moved faster than treatment and left 2 daughters to practice being managed by fear. "We move fast," Nyla said. "If I say run, you run. You don't wait for me. I'm not leaving you. Zuri." A beat. "Okay," Zuri said. They moved. They made the main staircase without contact, started down it. Were 3 steps from the bottom when the entrance hall lights came on. Not the emergency strips, the actual overhead lights, which meant power had been restored to this section. And Tae-hyun was standing in the entrance hall with 4 of his men, and Junwoo was being held between 2 others with his arms pinned, and the look on Tae-hyun's face when he saw Nyla and Zuri on the stairs was the first time she had seen something in him that she would genuinely classify as relief. Junwoo saw her too. His face had shed the performance completely. What was underneath it was not rage. Rage she could have categorized. It was something more like the expression of a man who had been running a calculation for a very long time and had just watched it fail, and was now doing the rapid cold arithmetic of what came next. "You move too fast," Tae-hyun said. He was not speaking to Nyla. He was speaking to Junwoo with a quietness that was different from all his other varieties of quiet. This one had the weight of something that had been a long time arriving. "I needed 1 more move. You gave me 3 in the same night." Junwoo said nothing. "The power cut was yours," Tae-hyun said. "The 2 men in the east hallway were yours. And the call you made to Baek Sung-min at 11:17 tonight," he paused, "was yours." Junwoo's jaw tightened, still nothing. "Say something," Tae-hyun said. And under the control, under all of it, there was something that Nyla heard clearly, and that had nothing to do with organizational politics or evidence or 43 loyal men. It was the sound of a person asking to be told they were wrong. Asking, in the only register available to him, to be given the version of this where it wasn't true. Junwoo looked at him for a long moment. "You were never going to give it to me," Junwoo said finally. "Any of it. I built half of what you have. I recruited, I managed, I bled for this organization as much as you did. And you ran it like it was yours alone." His voice was flat, stripped, the voice she'd heard from the duct. "I got tired of waiting." The silence that followed was the heaviest thing in the room. Tae-hyun stood in it without moving, without looking away from his cousin's face. And Nyla, from 3 steps up the staircase with her hand on Zuri's arm, watched something happen in Tae-hyun that she did not have a clean category for. Watched the controlled surface of him hold and hold and hold against something underneath it that was not rage but was grief, which was worse, which cost more, which left marks that rage did not. "I know," Tae-hyun said. And then to his men, "Take him." Junwoo was escorted through the side door. The room did not get lighter after he left. Tae-hyun stood where he was for a moment that seemed longer than it was. Then he turned and looked at Nyla on the stairs. "You were in the duct," he said. "I was in the duct," she confirmed. He looked at Zuri. Something in his expression that she was beginning to learn, not quite the precursor to the almost smile, but adjacent to it. The expression of a man who was surprised to find himself in a room with people who did not behave according to any model he had available. "Are you injured?" he said. The same first question, always the same first question. We're fine, Nyla said. She came down the last 3 stairs, stood in the entrance hall in the full light, in yesterday's clothes with a stripped thumbnail and dust from the ventilation duct on both knees, and looked at him, at the man who had just watched the last blood relative he trusted confirm, in his own words, that he had been selling him toward death for an indeterminate number of years. Your father? Tae-hyun said. He's still in the ground floor room? Yes. He didn't know about tonight. I know. A pause. I believe him. He said it with the particular weight of someone for whom that statement was not simple, for whom the revision it represented had required something significant to arrive at. Nyla held his gaze. What happens now? She said. Tae-hyun looked past her, toward the side door through which his cousin had just been taken. His face in the overhead light was not the face she'd catalogued in the alley, not the face from the library, not any of the versions she'd been building into something like an understanding of him. It was a new one, the face of a man standing on the other side of a thing that could not be stood on the other side of without everything being different. Now, he said, I finish it. He was gone before sunrise. Nyla knew it the way she'd come to know most things in this house. Not because anyone told her, but because the quality of the silence changed. By 5:40 in the morning, the east wing had a different texture to it, the particular emptiness of a space that has been recently vacated by people with purpose. And when she came downstairs at 6, with Zuri still asleep behind the locked suite door, Minyoung was in the entrance hall in her coat with a tablet in her hand, and the expression of someone who had not been to bed. He left 2 hours ago, Minyoung said, before Nyla could ask. With how many people? 12. A pause. He took the core team. Nyla looked at the side door. The entrance hall was quiet in the way that spaces were quiet when they'd recently held a lot of controlled urgency and then been emptied of it. And Junwoo, secured, separately. Minyoung's voice was professional, clipped, giving information without editorializing. There is a facility. He's being held there pending resolution. Resolution, Nyla said. Minyoung did not elaborate on the word. Your father is awake, she said instead. He asked for you. Marcus was sitting on the edge of the cot when she came in, which was an improvement over horizontal. Someone had brought him clean clothes. They were slightly too large, which meant they'd come from the household stores rather than anything fitted, and he'd washed his face. The left eye was less swollen than it had been the night before. He was holding a cup of something hot in both hands with the focused gratitude of a man for whom warmth had recently not been guaranteed. He looked up when she came in. His right eye tracked her the way it always had, with the specific quality of Marcus Brooks assessing the temperature of a room, reading whether he was about to be handed grace or a reckoning. Nyla pulled the room's single chair close to the cot and sat. Tell me the rest of it, she said. Nyla, Dad, she kept her voice even. This was the voice she had developed for situations that required steadiness regardless of what was happening in her chest. Tell me the rest of it, all of it, because last night Junwoo tried to have me and Zuri removed from this house, and Tae-hyun is currently somewhere in Seoul doing things I don't have details about, and I need to understand the complete shape of what happened if I'm going to make any decisions about what comes next. So, talk. Marcus looked at his hands around the cup, the broken fingers, the scar tissue on the knuckles. When I gave the Bake Syndicate the false meeting location, he said, I thought that would be the end of my involvement. I thought they'd send people to an empty location, figure out they'd been played, and then I'd have enough warning to disappear before they came back to me. He paused. What I didn't account for was that they already had another source, someone closer. When their people showed up at the real location on the right date, not mine, the real one, they didn't know the false information had come from me specifically. They thought it had come from their inside source and that I'd given them a test and they'd passed it. Nyla was quiet, processing this. So they thought you were loyal, she said. They thought I was loyal, Marcus confirmed, which meant instead of killing me when the meeting location I gave them turned out to be empty, which I'd been prepared for, they promoted me, started giving me more access, more information to pass. He set the cup down on the floor beside the cot. His hands, freed of it, looked older than she remembered. That's when I understood how deep it went, how long it had been going. Whoever their inside source was in Tae-hyun's organization, they'd been operating for years. The Beck Syndicate had information that only someone at the highest level could have provided. Did you find out who? A long pause. I found out something, Marcus said carefully. Nyla's spine went very straight. I was in their operations facility for about 6 weeks before they moved me, he said. During that time, I had access to certain communications. Not full access, not deliberate access, but I was doing documentation work and I saw things that weren't meant for me. He looked at her. There was a name in the communications that I recognized, not as a Beck Syndicate operative, as someone inside the Kang organization. Junwoo, she said. No, Marcus said. The word landed differently than she expected. She heard herself exhale. The name I saw, Marcus said, was Cha Min-young. The next 4 seconds were very long. Nyla sat in the chair in the small spare room and felt the information rearrange everything around her, the way a strong wind rearranged things that had seemed fixed. She went back through 5 weeks of the house, the controlled courtesy, the professional precision, the way Min-young had answered exactly the questions she'd been authorized to answer, and no others. The household logistics, the food, the medical access, the school arrangement for Zuri, all of it managed through Min-young's hands. The information flow of the entire estate, passing daily through the one person in the house who had been there the longest, who had Tae-hyun's complete operational trust, who knew the schedules and the locations and the decisions before they were executed, who had told her at 6 this morning exactly where Tae-hyun had gone and with how many people. Nyla stood up. "How certain are you?" she said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. "I saw the name in a communication that referenced a payment transfer," Marcus said. "Cha Min-young, along with an account number and a figure. I memorized the communication because I thought it might matter later." His eye was steady on her. "It mattered a lot that I was right about that." "You're certain it was her name specifically, not a different Cha Min-young?" "The communication referenced her role." He paused. "It referenced Kang Tae-hyun by name alongside hers, in the context of scheduling." Nyla was already at the door. "Nyla." His voice stopped her. The particular register of it, the one he'd used when she was small and about to do something dangerous. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to fix your mistake," she said, without heat, without blame. Just the fact of it. She went. The entrance hall was empty. Min-young was not where she'd been 20 minutes ago. The space held only her absence, the tablet she'd been carrying sitting on the hall table, which was wrong. Min-young did not put her tablet down. In 5 weeks, Nyla had never seen Min-young without the tablet. She left it, moved to the study. Empty. Moved to the kitchen. The household staff were at their morning work. The woman in her 50s glanced up, read Nyla's face with the economy of someone who had learned to read faces in houses like this one, and looked away without comment. Nyla went out into the grounds, cold, gray morning light. The river below was the color of old pewter. The landscaped paths were still ice-sheeted, and her breath was a visible cloud as she moved, not running, but moving with the kind of pace that covered ground. She went toward the structure at the property's east edge, the one she'd identified 2 weeks ago as communications infrastructure, the satellite array and the relay equipment that the house used for its secure network. The door to the communication structure was open. This was wrong in a different way from the tablet. The communication structure door was never open. She knew this from observation, had noted the key protocol, had watched 2 of Tae-hyun's technical staff use it. It required a code and a key, and the door was always closed behind. Nyla pushed it open wider and went in. And Min-young was standing at the central console with a headset on and her back to the door. She was speaking in rapid Korean. Nyla caught fragments, coordinates, and chiming, and a phrase she needed a moment to process before it assembled into meaning. 12 men, confirmed departure, core team. She was on a call. She was on a call and she was reciting Tae-hyun's team size and departure time to whoever was on the other end. Min-young heard her, or heard something, the slight change in air pressure, the shift in the ambient, and turned. Her face did a thing in that moment that Nyla would remember in precise detail afterward. It didn't collapse into panic. It didn't perform innocence. It simply went neutral in a specific way. The particular blankness of someone whose next 20 decisions were all happening simultaneously and visibly behind the eyes. She said something brief into the headset, then she removed it. They looked at each other across the console. "How long?" Nyla said. Min Young tilted her head fractionally, something that might have been the decision to drop the performance entirely, or might have been a recalibration of it. "Longer than you've been here. Before the ambush. Long before." Nyla felt the cold of the room. It was unheated, functional, the cold of machinery rather than weather. "You gave them the real location, that night." "Yes." 6 men died. Min Young's expression did not change. 7, if the ambush had succeeded the way it was designed. "Did you want him dead?" A pause. Not evasion. Consideration. The expression of a person answering honestly because honesty had stopped costing anything. "I wanted what he had," Min Young said. "He trusted me with everything, every schedule, every communication, every operational decision. I was the one who made the organization function at the level it functions. He made the decisions and I made the decisions real." Her voice was even, flat. The voice of someone reciting a position they'd held so long it had ceased to feel like grievance and become simply fact. "And then he brought you here." Nyla went very still. "Me," she said. "You." Min Young set the headset on the console. "In 5 years, Taehyun has never looked at anyone the way he looked when I told him you were in the duct." A pause. "He didn't ask about Junwoo first. He didn't ask about the security breach. He asked if you were in the building." Her voice remained even, but something underneath it had an edge now, fine and cold as wire. "That told me everything I needed to know about how much longer I had." "So you called them," Nyla said, "just now, to tell them where he is." "He's walking into a location that the Bake Syndicate now knows about, with 12 men against significantly more than 12. Min Young looked at her with the expression of a completed calculation. By the time he realizes the intelligence has been compromised, it will be too late to adjust. Nyla crossed the distance between them in 3 steps, and had the headset off the console in her hand before Min Young could move to stop her. Min Young moved anyway, reached for the headset with a speed that surprised her, got a hand on Nyla's wrist, and the two of them stood in the cold room in a grip that was not quite struggle, both of them understanding that what they were doing was less about the headset and more about the next 30 seconds, determining the shape of everything after. Nyla was taller, had 3 years of 16-hour shifts in her arms and legs, the functional strength of someone who had carried things, trays, groceries, the weight of every circumstance that didn't have anyone else to carry it. Min Young was compact and had something else, the controlled economy of a person who had made a decision about their own life some time ago and had not second-guessed it since. The headset hit the floor. Min Young's elbow caught Nyla in the side of the jaw. Not a full impact, glancing, but enough to make her vision strobe for 1 second. She went back a step. Min Young went for the door. Nyla caught her by the coat. They went down together onto the concrete floor, which was cold, in a way that registered as information rather than pain. And for the next 20 seconds, it was nothing elegant or cinematic. It was 2 people on a floor in a communications room in the gray morning, both of them trying to control something the other person had. Both of them breathing hard through their noses because breathing through the mouth cost too much. Nyla got an arm across Min Young's shoulders from behind, and her weight on top of that and held. Min Young went still. They stayed like that, both of them breathing, the cold floor under them, the equipment around them continuing its function without any awareness of what was happening at its base. "There's a phone on the console," Nyla said, into the specific quality of this particular silence. "I'm going to stand up and use it to call Taehyun. If you move before I have him on the line, I will put you back on this floor, and I will not be polite about it the second time." Min Young said nothing. Nyla stood up, kept her eyes on Min Young, reached the console, picked up the secondary handset. Hardwired, encrypted, she'd seen Taehyun use it from this room once, and looked at the panel of labeled extensions until she found the one that read direct in Korean. She dialed. 4 rings. 5. 6. She felt each ring as a physical thing, in her chest, in the jaw that was beginning to throb from the elbow, in the hands that were steadier than they had any reasonable right to be. On the seventh ring, the line connected. There was noise on the other end. Not voice, environmental noise, the particular acoustic of an outdoor space at a distance from things, wind and surface, and the compressed sound of people moving. Tae-hyun, she said. A pause. Then his voice, and it was the voice she'd heard in the alley, clipped, precise, expecting to be obeyed, but underneath that something that was alert in a new way. Nyla. Not a question. Min-young has been feeding your location and team information to the Bake Syndicate, she said. She called them this morning. They know you're coming with 12 people and they know when you left. Silence on the line. Not a long silence. 3 seconds? Maybe 4. She understood in those 3 seconds that she was listening to a man reconstruct an entire operational architecture in real time, pulling out every piece that had passed through Min-young's hands and reassessing it, understanding that what he thought was a clean plan was not a clean plan, that the intelligence he'd acted on had been curated by someone who was curating it for 2 audiences simultaneously. How certain, he said. I heard her on the call, and my father saw her name in Beck Syndicate Communications 2 months ago. Another silence, different quality. Your father, he said, saw her name. Yes, she heard him exhale. Just once. The sound of a man who was running the math on how many things he'd said in front of Min-young in the last 5 years. How many operations, how many decisions, how many vulnerabilities she had been present for and cataloging. The sound of that arithmetic arriving at its total. Where is she now? He said. Nyla looked at the floor in front of the console. Min-young was gone. The door to the communications structure stood open to the gray morning, cold air moving through it in a thin, continuous stream, and the floor where Min-young had been was empty, and the only evidence she'd been there at all was a single dark smear on the concrete that might have been from the heel of her shoe. Nyla turned to look at the door, at the grounds beyond it, at the iron-gray sky above the estate and the river below and the city in the distance, which did not stop for any of this, which continued its own enormous business without reference to what was happening in a small concrete room on a rise above the Han. She had been watching Min-young. She had been watching her. And then she had been watching the phone, and it had been 4 seconds, maybe 5, the time it took to understand that she was gone and register the open door, and she had lost her in those 4 seconds as completely as if she'd never been there at all. She's gone, Neela said into the phone. The silence on Tae-hyun's end this time was the longest she had heard from him. Pull back, she heard him say. Not to her, to someone near him, a command that was already being acted on before it finished being spoken. Then, back to the line, Nyla, listen carefully. I'm listening. The estate is no longer secure. His voice had the particular flatness of someone removing emotion from logistics because emotion was a resource that couldn't be spent here. I am sending 2 men back. You will leave with Zuri and your father in the next 20 minutes. Do not use the main gate. There is a service exit on the south perimeter behind the groundskeeping structure. There is a vehicle there with keys in the left wheel well. You take that vehicle and you drive to the address I am going to give you now. She memorized the address in one pass. She'd always been able to do that. Numbers, routes, the spatial grammar of places. She'd been doing it since she was 8 years old, navigating Chicago transit alone. 20 minutes, she said. 18, now. She moved. Getting Marcus off the cot and moving was not fast. His body had stored the damage of the last 3 months in the specific way that bodies stored sustained trauma, not as acute pain in the moment of recovery, but as a catalog of limitations that announced themselves only when called upon. His left knee, which he'd said nothing about, buckled on the second step, and she caught him, took his weight across her shoulders the way she'd been shown in the ER observation rotations, and they moved. Zuri had the bag packed before Nyla finished the sentence. This was the thing about her sister. She did not waste time on the moment of shock. She processed on the move, absorbed information, and adjusted while still in motion, which was possibly the most useful quality a person could have, and which she had inherited from a mother who was no longer alive to see how well it had taken. They were at the service exit in 14 minutes. The vehicle was there, Old SUV, gray, the kind that was everywhere in Seoul and therefore invisible. Keys in the left wheel, well as specified. Nyla loaded Marcus into the back seat, Zuri into the passenger seat, and got behind the wheel. Her hands on the steering wheel were shaking. She noticed this without interest. Acknowledged it the way you acknowledged weather. Let it be there. She started the vehicle. Nyla, Zuri said. Not yet. Nyla. Softer this time. The voice Zuri used when she was not asking for information but asking for something else. Nyla looked at her. In the gray morning light in the cab of the old SUV with the service gate ahead of them and the estate behind them and the city below them, and somewhere in that city, a man who had walked into a compromised position with 12 people, Nyla looked at her sister and for 1 second let the compartment open just enough to feel the full weight of what was in it. Then she closed it. He pulled back, she said. He got off the line before I did. He was already moving. She put the car in gear. He's not an idiot. I know, Zuri said. She was facing forward now. Her hands were in her lap and they were still. I know he's not. Nyla drove through the gate. The city opened up below them as she took the first switchback down the estate road. All of it, the full spread of Seoul in early morning, the compressed grid of it, the million lit windows of a city that had been running its own logic long before any of them arrived in it and would continue doing so long after. She found the highway entrance by the address landmarks Tae-hyun had given her, and merged into the morning traffic, which was beginning to thicken, ordinary people making ordinary commutes in the ordinary gray light. In the back seat, Marcus said nothing. She could hear him breathing, labored on the inhale, the sound of ribs that hadn't been treated properly. She would deal with that later. Later was the only category she had room for right now. She drove. And somewhere in the city ahead of her, in a location the Beck Syndicate knew about and had prepared for, Kang Tae-hyun was either pulling his 12 men back fast enough to matter, or he wasn't. That was the thought she cut off. She cut it off cleanly and put her eyes on the road and drove. The address was a building in Yongdong-po, a commercial district block that had the functional anonymity of a place chosen specifically for that quality. 7 stories, mixed use, the kind of structure that had dry cleaning and a dental office on the lower floors and became progressively less identifiable the higher you went. She found the parking structure entrance on the second pass. It was not marked in the way she'd expected, and took the car down to the sublevel, where a man she'd never seen before was already standing at the far end of the row. He was one of Tae-hyun's people. She knew this from the way he stood and from the fact that he was there at all. But she'd never seen his face, and he clearly knew who she was, which told her something about the level of operational detail that had been moving around her without her awareness. He led them up through a service staircase to the 5th floor, to a space that was set up less like a safe house and more like a forward operations room, tables, equipment, communication arrays that were more sophisticated than the estate had carried. 3 other people already in the room, none of whom she recognized, all of them moving. Where is he? She said. The man who'd met them in the parking structure looked at her and said, in English that was accented but precise, en route, estimated 12 minutes. She put Marcus in a chair. He didn't argue. His color had grayed during the drive, and his breathing was worse than it had been in the estate room, and she was doing a continuous background calculation about whether the rib situation had progressed into something pulmonary. She needed to examine him properly. She did not have 12 minutes to do it, but she was going to take 6. Zuri was already moving, had oriented to the room with the same rapid spatial intelligence she applied to everything, had identified the most useful corner, had set the bag down and was watching the people working with the focused quiet of someone cataloging. Sit with him, Nyla said. Zuri sat, pulled the chair close, took Marcus's hand in both of hers and held it without comment, the way you held things you'd been afraid of losing. Marcus looked at his younger daughter. His right eye was wet. He blinked it clear. Hey, Z, he said. Hey, Dad, Zuri said. Her voice was completely steady. You look terrible. I know. We're going to talk about everything later. I know that too. Nyla worked. She got Marcus's coat off, got her hands on his ribs through the shirt, pressed and felt, and listened with the part of her that had logged 300 clinical hours before circumstances had redirected her entirely. 2 ribs cracked on the left, possibly 3. Breathing labored, but not wet, Not plural, not yet. He needed imaging and analgesics and a week of stillness, and he was going to get none of those things in the next several hours. She did what she could, taped what she could with supplies from the room's medical kit, more comprehensive than the estate's, which told her this space had been assembled by someone who planned for extended operations. Tae-hyun's people did not improvise their infrastructure. At the 8-minute mark, she heard the staircase. He came in with 9 men instead of 12. She counted without deciding to. It was automatic, the same counting that had tracked seconds in the alley and minutes on the console phone. 9 of the 12 he'd left with. She filed the arithmetic and looked at his face. He had a cut above his left eyebrow that had bled down the side of his face and dried there, brown and crackling at the edges. His coat was gone. The dark sweater had a tear along the right shoulder that had not been there this morning. He was walking normally. No favoring, no compensation, which told her nothing definitive about what was underneath the sweater. He scanned the room, hit Marcus, hit Zuri, hit Nyla. Something in his chest appeared to release a fraction of an inch. Nyla. The same first question, forming in his throat. "I'm fine," she said, before he could ask it. "Sit down." He didn't sit down. He moved to the central table where one of his people was already spreading out a physical map. Paper, not digital, which she understood now was a security decision rather than an anachronism, and began talking in rapid Korean to the 3 men who'd already been in the room. She caught fragments, names, locations, a word that repeated, perimeter, and then Min Young, and then something she didn't catch that made 2 of the 3 men's faces change. She let him work. Moved to the medical kit and began inventory. Gauze, closure strips, antiseptic. And when he'd finished the immediate briefing, she crossed to where he was standing and said quietly, "Your shoulder." "Later." "Now," she said, "it'll take 3 minutes and you'll function better for it." He looked at her. Made the decision the way he made all his decisions, quickly, without visible deliberation. He sat on the edge of the table. She got the sweater up over the tear and looked at what was underneath. Not a bullet? She'd have known from the way he walked. A blade. A cut along the upper arm and across the top of the shoulder, shallow but long, the kind that bled consistently and would stiffen badly if not closed. She cleaned it with the antiseptic and felt him not move under her hands. The same absolute stillness he'd had in the alley, the same refusal to give pain the acknowledgement of reaction. 3 men, she said. Yes? She applied closure strips in careful intervals, pressing each one flat. Bake Syndicate. Their forward team. They were waiting at the location. He paused. Let her work. We pulled back before they could fully close the position, but they had anticipated the pullback route. How? Because Min Young had the route. He said it without inflection. Not anger yet. She could hear the anger beneath it, compressed into something very small and very dense, but the operational surface was still functional. She has been managing my route planning for 4 years. She knows every contingency I built because she built most of them with me. Neela pressed the last closure strip, pulled the sweater back down. The 3 men, she said. Han Seok, Park Jae-min, Choi. A pause. They were my people for 6 years, 9 years, 11 years. He was looking at the map on the table. They were not careless. The position was designed specifically for them. She heard what was underneath that. The particular weight of losing people who had followed your decisions into a location that had been compromised by someone you trusted more than them. She didn't say anything about it. There was nothing to say that would cost less than the silence. Junwoo, she said instead, still secured. He looked at her. He doesn't know about Min Young yet. Does it matter? It matters because when I go to him, I need to know whether they were operating together or independently. He reached past her for the water bottle on the table. Drank. 2 simultaneous traders in the same organization operating separately is unusual. Operating together implies a structure I haven't fully mapped yet. And if they were working together, then there are others I haven't identified. He set the water bottle down. And I need to know who before I move against the back syndicate directly. Otherwise, I'm dismantling their operation while they're dismantling mine from the inside. Nyla looked at the room, at the 9 men, the maps, the equipment, at her father in the chair with Zuri's hands around his and his eyes closed. at the gray daylight coming through the high windows of a building chosen for its anonymity. "You need to go back to Junwoo," she said. "Yes." "And you think he'll tell you?" Taehyun was quiet for a moment. "I think he's been holding something back, something he was keeping as leverage." He looked at her. "He expected to be killed quickly. When I had him secured instead, he started calculating how long he had and what he could trade." A pause. "He's ready to trade." "Then go," she said. He looked at her, the full focus of it, the way he looked at things he hadn't categorized yet. "You were supposed to be at the safe address," he said. "Not here. The man in the parking structure brought us here." "I told him the safe address." "I told him here," she said. "He made a judgment call." Something moved in Taehyun's face. "I'll speak to him about that." "Don't." She held his gaze. "I needed to know you were in one piece. That's not negotiable for me anymore, apparently." She said it without softness, as pure information, the same way she said everything that mattered. "Go talk to Junwoo." He went. Luchat. The facility where Junwoo was being held was 40 minutes south, and Taehyun took 4 men with him and left 5 with Nyla and the others, which she understood as a resource allocation decision and chose not to examine too carefully in terms of what it implied about her value in his operational calculus. She spent the 40 minutes doing what she did when circumstances required something of her hands while her mind worked. She checked Marcus's ribs again. She got Zuri to eat something from the supplies in the room. Energy bars, not adequate, but caloric. She walked the perimeter of the 5th floor space and mapped the exits and the stairwells and the one window that opened onto a fire escape. She found the secondary communication array and spent 20 minutes learning its interface, asking one of the 5 remaining men, a quiet person in his late 20s, who answered her questions with the neutral competence of someone who had decided she was an operational reality he was going to cooperate with, to show her the call protocol. Marcus watched her do all of this from the chair. "You've changed," he said, when she came back to sit near him. 3 years, she said. "It's not time." He looked at her. The right eye still had that quality, reading the room, reading her. "It's something else." She did not answer. "He's not what I thought he was," Marcus said. "From the outside, the name, what people say." "No," she said. "He's not. Are you—" He stopped, tried again. "Is this Dad?" She looked at him. "Not right now." He nodded, closed his eye. The breathing pattern remained stable, which was the most she could ask of it for the moment. Taehyun was back in 31 minutes. She heard it in the stairwell before the door opened. His footstep pattern had a specific weight and rhythm she'd cataloged without intending to. The same way she'd cataloged everything in this house and every house before it. And what she heard coming up the stairs was that pattern at a speed that was not quite running, but was as close as she'd ever heard it get. He came through the door and looked directly at her. His face had the new quality she'd first seen in the entrance hall when Junwoo was taken, the face on the other side of something that could not be revisited. "They were not operating independently," he said. The room went quiet. His 5 men all orienting to him. "Min Young recruited Junwoo," he said, "not the reverse. She made first contact with the Baek Syndicate 8 years ago, 3 years before Junwoo became involved." He crossed to the table. The map was still spread there. "She has been the primary source. Junwoo was secondary, brought in because she needed someone with operational authority who could authorize certain movements without her fingerprints directly on them." He paused. Junwoo believed he was using her access to build his own relationship with the Baek Syndicate. He didn't know she had been there first, that she was managing him the same way she managed everything. "Bari Gi." Nyla heard Marcus make a sound from his chair. Not words. "The ambush," Taehyun said. "The night Nyla found me. That was Min Young's operation. She gave the real location, the real date, the real security configuration. Junwoo provided the authorization signature on the logistical movements that positioned my team there. He thought he was making the decision. She had already made it." The room held this for a moment. "Where is she now?" the quiet young man said. "That," Taehyun said, "is what we need to determine." He looked at the map. It was Seoul. the full spread of it, the districts marked in a notation system she didn't know. His finger moved to a point in the western part of the city. The Bake Syndicate's primary operations facility, he said. We have believed for 2 years that this location was a logistics warehouse. He paused. Junwoo has now told me it is also where Bake Sung-min operates from directly. The intelligence was correct. We simply never acted on it because Min Young always had a reason to delay. He looked up, at his men, at Nyla. She is there now, or she will be within the hour, because she knows Junwoo will talk, and she knows what I'll do with what he tells me, and she needs to be inside Bake Sung-min's protection before I move. Then you move now, said the man she didn't know. Before she's in. Yes. The room shifted, the particular shift of a space in which a decision has been made, and everything now becomes preparation rather than deliberation. Men moving to equipment, to phones, to the secondary communication array she'd spent 20 minutes learning, the energy different, tighter. Nyla looked at Tae-hyun across the table. 12 against more than 12 this morning, she said. This is different. This morning they were expecting us. He was checking something on the communication array. Tonight we have Junwoo's floor plans, we have the shift schedules, we have the internal security protocols that Min Young designed, which means I know every weakness in them because she once told me. A pause. She designed their security using the same principles she used for mine. I know every one of them. How many men do you have available? Total? With the people I'm calling now, 31. She did the math. Against an entrenched position with a warning that they were coming, even with floor plans, even with security knowledge. What can I do? She said. He looked at her. Not the assessment look, not the cataloging, something more direct. Stay here, he said, with your family. That's what you can do. Tae-hyun, Nyla. He moved from the table to where she was standing, close enough that she could see the dried blood on the side of his face and the closure strips on his shoulder through the sweater and the quality of his eyes, which were doing the same thing they'd done in the alley. Not the performance of steadiness, but the real kind, the kind that costs something. I need to know where you are, specifically and exactly. If I don't know where you are, I cannot function at the level this requires. He said it flatly, as information. That is not a small thing I'm telling you. She held his gaze, felt the weight of what he was actually saying move through her like a current. I hear you, she said. Then stay. He turned back to the room, back to the preparation, back to 31 men and floor plans and a window of time that was closing as they stood there because somewhere in the western part of the city, a woman who had spent 8 years inside Tae-hyun's life was moving toward a building that would put her beyond reach. Nyla stood where she was. She stayed. She watched him work, watched the operational precision of it, the economy, watched him give instruction with the minimum words necessary, and watched his people respond with the completeness of people who had been following this specific voice long enough to trust it in the way that trust only came from accumulated evidence. Watched him check the shoulder without acknowledging the checking. At the 40-minute mark, they were ready to move. At the 41-minute mark, the communication array activated with an incoming signal. The quiet young man answered it, listened. His face changed in a way that made Nyla's spine go straight before she heard the words. He turned to Tae-hyun and said 4 words in Korean. Nyla understood 3 of them. They have someone. Tae-hyun went very still. The young man said more. She caught fragments, a location, a time frame, and then a name that she processed a beat after it landed because her brain did not want to process it, ran it through twice before accepting it because the alternative was that she had heard incorrectly. She had not heard incorrectly. The name was Cha Min Young, and the person Min Young had taken, not from this location, not from the estate, but from the route between the estate and the safe address, the route that Min Young had known because she had known every route. The person who had been in a vehicle that had not made it to either destination was the one person in this entire situation that Tae-hyun's face, going the color of concrete, told her she could not afford to lose. Nyla heard herself say her sister's name. The word came out of her without the steadiness, without the compartment, just raw and open and wrong-sounding in the operational quiet of the room, And she heard it and knew from the sound of it that the person who had walked into the alley 3 weeks ago and not flinched was right now very far away. And the person standing in this room with her heart exposed and her hands beginning to shake was something else, something she hadn't had to be since the night her mother died. And it was Tae-hyun who crossed the room to her in 3 steps and put both hands on her shoulders and held her gaze with the full weight of his and said, with a certainty that she would either have to trust completely or not at all, "I will bring her back." She looked at him. The room was waiting. Outside the high windows, Seoul had gone dark, and somewhere in that darkness, a 31-man operation was about to redirect itself entirely. And Min Young was inside a building with Nyla's 16-year-old sister and a window of time that was already closing. "I know," Nyla said. She said it to his face, to the hands on her shoulders, to the certainty in his eyes that she had decided in this moment to hold on to, not because she was naive about what certainty cost in situations like this one, but because the alternative, the version where she did not hold on to it, was not a version she could function inside of. She stepped back, squared herself. "Tell me what you need from me," she said. What he needed from her was the one thing she was worst at. He needed her to stay in the room. He needed her to stay in the room with Marcus and the quiet young man whose name she'd learned was Dong-hyun and the communication array she'd spent 20 minutes learning, and he needed her to be the relay point, the person who held the thread between the field and the fallback, who monitored the incoming signals and coordinated the medical response for whatever came back through the door. She understood why. She understood the operational logic of it completely, which made it no easier to watch him leave with 31 men and a set of floor plans and a window of time that was measured in minutes. The door closed. The room had 4 people in it: Nyla, Dong-hyun, Marcus in the chair, and a man she'd been calling Glasses because she hadn't learned his name, and he wore them. Zuri's bag was still in the corner where she'd set it down. Nyla looked at it and then looked away from it and went to the communication array. "Show me the signal protocols again," she said to Dong-hyun. He showed her. She absorbed them without speaking, sat down at the array and put her hands on the console, and made herself breathe at a rate that would sustain function rather than express what was happening in her chest. And she waited. The first signal came at 11 minutes. It was a position confirmation. "Standard," Dong-hyun told her, "a check-in protocol at the initial approach." She relayed it logged, moved to the next. At 19 minutes, 2 signals came within 30 seconds of each other. One from the north approach team, one from the east. Both confirmed position. Taehyun's voice was not on either. He was running silent, which meant he was inside the approach perimeter and had gone to operational quiet. At 23 minutes, nothing. The nothing lasted 4 minutes and was the longest 4 minutes of Nyla Brooks' life up to and including the night her mother's hospital called, and including every overnight shift she'd worked alone in a city that was not hers. At 27 minutes, a burst of sound on the array, not voice, the environmental audio of a channel that had been opened close to something loud. And then Tae-hyun's voice, sharp and very close to the microphone, saying 3 words in Korean that Dong-hyun translated without being asked. "We're inside, moving." Nyla exhaled. Marcus, who had been silent in the chair since Tae-hyun left, let out a breath that had things in it she didn't try to catalog. Then the array went to the kind of noise that meant the channel was open and live, and what was coming through it was not being filtered for content. She heard the next 11 minutes. She heard it in fragments, gunfire in the specific register of enclosed spaces, different from what she'd learned from the ER, more immediate, less processed. She heard voices, Korean she could catch in pieces. She heard something that was not a voice and told herself it was equipment. She heard Tae-hyun once, twice, a third time. Each time the same controlled precision under increasing amounts of whatever was happening around him. At the 38-minute mark, she heard a different voice on the channel. Young, female. Familiar in the way that things you'd memorized at a cellular level were familiar. So deep the recognition happened in the body before the brain. Zuri said, I'm okay. And then the channel dropped. Teat. The silence lasted 7 minutes. Nyla sat at the array and held her hands flat on the console and did not move and did not speak. Dong-hyun watched her with the careful attention of someone who had assessed a situation and decided that proximity without intrusion was the correct response. Marcus had his eye closed. His lips were moving without sound. At the 45th minute, the array reactivated. Taehyun's voice. Clear. The environmental audio had changed. She could hear it. The acoustics different. The background noise reduced to something that read as aftermath rather than active. Nyla. I'm here, she said. Zuri is with me. A pause. A very brief one, the length of a man checking what he was about to say against the operational habit of compression. She is not injured. The thing in Nyla's chest uncompressed so fast it hurt. And Min Young, she said, because she had to. The pause this time was longer. Min Young is in custody, he said. Baek Sung-min is dead. His organization is... We are in the process of concluding. A breath she almost didn't catch. I need you to send Dong-hyun's team to the South Access. Medical. How many? 3 men with non-critical, 2 with... A pause. More serious. I'm sending them, she said. She was already relaying to Dong-hyun before the channel closed. They came back in 2 vehicles at the 58-minute mark. Nyla was at the parking structure entrance when they pulled in. She had a medical kit. She had Dong-hyun behind her with additional supplies and the clear-eyed competence of someone who had done this before. She had both hands steady. The first vehicle's rear door opened and Zuri stepped out, and Nyla crossed the remaining distance between them in something that was not quite running, put both arms around her sister and felt her arms come back. And they stood in the parking structure with the cold concrete smell and the fluorescent light in a hold that did not have a category, that was just 2 people who had been scared out of their minds for 58 minutes, recalibrating to the fact of each other. Zuri was shaking. Her coat was torn at the collar and there was a bruise forming at her temple that was going to be significant by morning, but she was standing on her own feet, and her breathing was not the compromised breathing, was the shaky breathing of fear rather than the tight breathing of the lungs, which meant her body had held through it, which was the one thing Nyla had been bargaining with the silence about. I'm okay, Zuri said into Nyla's shoulder. I am. I'm okay. I know, Nyla said. I know you are. She held her for another moment. Then she let go because there was work, and she pulled back and looked at her sister's face. Took it in fully, the bruise, the shock still working its way through her system. The absolute presence in her eyes that said she was there was intact, was already beginning the processing that would take much longer than tonight. Go be with Dad, Nyla said. He needs to see you. Zuri went. Nyla turned to the second vehicle. Taehyun was the last one out. She had been doing triage, working through the 2 serious injuries with Dong-hyun, directing the non-critical men to sit and wait, her hands in the work and her eyes tracking, and she had noted him in her peripheral awareness the way she noted everything essential without centering it. And by the time she got to him, the others were settled, and it was just the 2 of them in the far end of the parking structure with a medical kit and the fluorescent light. He had a new injury, not the shoulder, something to the left leg, a through wound low on the thigh that had been field dressed badly and was bleeding through the dressing. He was standing on it because he had not yet stopped needing to stand on it, but the quality of how he was standing told her it had cost him something significant in the last hour. Sit down, she said. He sat on the hood of the second vehicle. She cut the field dressing away. Worked fast and careful, the way she'd worked in the alley the first night, with the same focused economy that had nothing to do with feeling nothing and everything to do with feeling it and working anyway. The wound was serious, not arterial. If it had been arterial, he would not have walked out, but deep. And the field dressing had been applied without proper compression, which meant the blood loss over the last 40-some minutes had been more than it should have been. She worked. He let her. Min Young, she said, while her hands were in the dressing. Secured, he said. She'll be transferred to federal contacts. There are people in the organized crime division who have been building a case against the Beck syndicate for 3 years. She is now a substantial piece of evidence. She'll cooperate. She'll negotiate, he said. She is very good at that. A pause. It is how she survived 8 years in 2 organizations simultaneously. Nyla applied pressure and held it. And Jun-woo. The silence was the same quality as the one in the entrance hall the night Jun-woo was taken, the one that had grief in it rather than rage. The same, he said. Federal custody. The case already exists. I have been providing documentation to certain investigators for 2 years on the Bayek syndicate. Jun Woo's involvement is extensive enough to be useful to them. You're not going to... She stopped. Kill him, he said, flatly, without the performance of offense. No. A pause. He is the only family I had. I would like him to be alive somewhere, being accountable for what he did, for a long time. His voice was even, but there was something moving underneath it. She could hear it the way you heard water under ice, not visible but present and in motion. That is the punishment I have chosen. It will last longer than the other kind. Nyla finished the dressing. Proper compression this time, properly secured. She sat back and looked at her work and then looked at him. He was watching her. She had seen his face in many configurations over the 6 weeks since the alley. The operational mask, the almost smile, the controlled grief of the entrance hall, the face in the library when he'd told her he wasn't certain of the things he'd been certain of for 3 years. She had been building a catalog of those configurations the way she built catalogs of everything important, learning the geography. This was a new one. It was a face without a project, without an immediate operational requirement, a face at the end of something that had been ongoing long enough that ending it had left a specific kind of space. Zuri, he said. She's okay. Bruising, shock, which will take time, her lungs held. Nyla looked at her hands. She'll need to talk to someone, a professional, not me. I'll arrange it. I know you will. She looked up. That's something I've learned about you. You arrange things. Something moved in his face. It is what I know how to do. It's not the only thing. He was quiet. The night in the alley, he said. I have thought about it many times, what you did. He looked at his hands on the car hood, then back at her. I was certain you would walk away. Everyone in my life walks away, or they stay because of what I can provide. You stayed because... He paused, seeming to find the right word a less efficient process than usual. Because a bleeding man required what you had, not what I had. You were a person who needed help, she said. That's not complicated. It was complicated to me. He held her gaze. I had forgotten what that looked like. Someone responding to a person rather than a position. Nyla looked at him for a long moment. At the dried blood and the closed-off expression that was right now less closed than she'd ever seen it. At the man underneath the organizational structure and the reputation and the 3 years of operating on a lie someone close to him had built and maintained with care. What happens now, she said, with your organization? It contracts, he said, significantly. The Bake Syndicate's dismantling will require documentation, cooperation with investigators. Some activities I've managed will need to cease. I have been moving toward this for longer than you've been here, in certain respects. A pause. It is not retirement, but it is a different shape. A legal shape. A more legal shape, he said, with the almost smile, which was slightly more visible tonight than it had ever been. I'm not going to claim more than I can deliver. She felt the corner of her own mouth move, involuntarily. That's fair, she said. She told him she was leaving the following morning. She told him in the kitchen of a different safe location, a smaller one, a residential apartment in Mapogu that was ironically 3 blocks from the apartment she and Zuri had lived in. While the coffee was going, and the apartment was quiet with Marcus and Zuri asleep in the 2 bedrooms, and the sole morning doing its slow gray brightening outside the window. Taehyun was at the kitchen table. His leg was properly dressed now, properly medicated, and he was managing it with the focused practicality he brought to all physical circumstances. He looked at her when she said it and did not look surprised. To where? He said. I don't know yet. Somewhere Zuri can finish school. Somewhere with access to a nursing program. She held her coffee mug in both hands. My father needs real medical attention. A hospital, imaging, treatment, and then after that he needs to go somewhere that isn't Korea, at least for a while. You said you could help with that. I said I could arrange it, he said. I will. I know. She looked at the table. I'm not asking you to not do that. I'm asking you to do it because it's the right thing, not as currency. I know the difference, he said quietly. I know you do. She looked at him. That's something else I learned. He was quiet for a moment. The coffee maker finished and the sound of it filled the kitchen briefly and then settled. The nursing program, he said. I was a year from finishing when Zuri's diagnosis came. She set the mug down. I've been carrying those credits around for 3 years like a debt I'll get to later. I'd like it to be now. He nodded. The nod of a man who understood the logic of a deferred thing being reclaimed. You could stay, he said. It was not a plea. It was not a negotiation. It had the same quality as everything he said that was real. Flat, direct, the information offered and the response left entirely to the recipient. Nyla looked at him across the kitchen table. She thought about the alley, the gun, the half sandwich, the 6 minutes of holding pressure in the cold while a man who could have shot her chose not to. And she had stayed anyway, not because she wasn't afraid, but because the situation required what she had. And she had learned a long time ago that the situation's requirements were the thing you responded to. She thought about the library, the almost smile she'd been cataloging, the way he said her name, as though he'd been holding it at a specific distance since the first night, examining it. She thought about the parking structure. I will bring her back, said with the weight of a man who had been let down by everyone close to him and had decided, somewhere in the last 6 weeks, to stop operating from behind glass. I know, she said. I know I could. She picked up her mug, looked at the window. The city was coming up in the light, gray to pale gold, the river catching it in the distance. I need to do this first, she said. The nursing program. My father settled somewhere. Zuri finished with school properly, with the support she should have had 3 years ago. She looked back at him. I need to build the version of my life that I chose, not the version that circumstances handed me. Do you understand that? He was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he said. And after that, she said. She did not finish the sentence. She left it where it was, open-ended, in the kitchen with the coffee and the morning light, because some things were not promises and not commitments, but were simply the accurate statement of a direction, and the direction was real even if the distance had not been measured yet. Tae-hun looked at her. She watched him take the unfinished sentence and hold it, watched him do with it what she had learned he did with things that mattered, which was to receive them without performing a response, to let them land at the real depth rather than the managed surface. After that, he said, I will be here. Marcus left on a Thursday. Tae-hun arranged it with the compressed efficiency of a man who had been moving people and resources through complicated circumstances for a long time and had long since stopped finding it remarkable. A new identity. Medical facilities in Canada, Vancouver, where the winters were manageable, and the Vietnamese and Korean communities had been there long enough to have roots that would give a man with a new name something to attach to. A month of intensive treatment for the ribs, the leg, the 2 fingers, the accumulated damage of months of captivity. Nyla drove him to the handoff point herself. In the car, they didn't talk about most of it. The gambling, the debt, the years of large gestures and larger absences. They did not open those compartments in the front seat of an early morning car ride, because some reckonings required more than a car ride, and they both knew it, and the silence between them was the silence of 2 people who understood that the accounting would come when there was time and space for it, and would come honestly and fully, and that it was survivable, which was perhaps the most any accounting could be. What Marcus said, at the handoff point, standing outside the car with the bag that contained the careful construction of a new life, documents, medical records, the address in Vancouver, a phone registered under the new name, was this. Your mother would have... He stopped, started again. She would have been very tired of worrying about you. His voice was rough in the specific way of a man trying to carry humor that has too much weight in it. And she would have been so proud of you, it would have embarrassed you. Nyla stood outside the car and looked at her father. At the damaged face that was beginning, very slowly, to be less damaged. At the man inside it who had made catastrophic choices and had also, at a specific moment in a foreign city, tried to protect someone else at great cost to himself, which did not cancel the catastrophic choices, but which existed alongside them in the complicated way that everything about Marcus Brooks existed. Go get better, she said. And then call me. Actually call. Actually call, he said. Okay. He hugged her. It was the hug of a man relearning how to take up the right amount of space. She let him. Then he went and she watched him go, and she got back in the car and sat for a minute with her hands on the wheel before starting it. The nursing school enrollment took 3 weeks to process. It was a different program than the original one, a Korean university with an accelerated pathway for students with prior credits, a 3-semester bridge that would put her exactly where she should have been 4 years ago. The paperwork was complicated. The language requirements were manageable. The tuition was covered by a transfer from an account she had not set up, and which Tae-hyun, when she called him about it, said only, "Consider it what I owe your father, redirected." She had started to argue, and then had thought about the logic of it for a moment, and had said, "One time," and he had said, "One time," and that had been the end of it. Zuri's school enrollment was smoother. She had the Korean now, better than Nyla's, sharper, with the particular fluency of someone who'd been absorbing it for 3 years in the way young people absorbed language, at the cellular level rather than through effort. The counselor Tae-hyun arranged was a woman in her 40s who worked specifically with people who had been through acute crisis events, and Zuri went to her twice a week and came back from the sessions quieter than usual and slightly more settled each time, which was what settling looked like when it was real rather than performed. They found an apartment in Mapogu, a real one this time, 2 bedrooms with working window frames and a heater that functioned without negotiation, on a street with a convenience store and a pharmacy 3 minutes walk and the subway 4. It was not the estate above the river. It was considerably smaller and considerably more theirs. She saw Tae-hyun on a Sunday, 6 weeks after she'd told him she was leaving. Not by arrangement. She had not been avoiding him, but she had been building, deliberately and with full attention, the architecture of a life that was not organized around proximity to his, and she had understood that this required a certain amount of time and space in which to become real. But she had told him where the apartment was, and she had had known, in the way you knew things about people you'd cataloged carefully, that he would find the particular moment rather than impose one. The Sunday was a gray morning, the kind Seoul did in late winter before the spring started considering itself. She was in the convenience store on her street buying coffee and the cheap pastries that she had never actually stopped liking despite having access, for 6 weeks, to a household cook's breakfast spreads, and he was standing outside when she came out. He looked different from the estate, not less. He was not a person who became less in different contexts, but differently scaled. Without the architecture of the household around him, he was just a man in a good coat standing on a Seoul sidewalk in the cold, and that was somehow more rather than less. She looked at him. He looked at her. "I was in the neighborhood," he said. "You don't do things by accident," she said. "No," he agreed. "I don't." She handed him one of the coffees. He took it with both hands the way she'd given it, and she understood in that gesture, the way he'd taken the half sandwich in the alley, the same focused acknowledgement of what was being offered, that some things were continuous, that the person she'd met bleeding in the dark was the same person standing in the thin winter light with a convenience store coffee. And the distance between those two versions was just time and cost, which was true of everyone. They walked. There was nowhere in particular they were going, and the Sunday morning had the quality of a city exhaling. Less traffic, less urgency, the particular looseness of a day that was not making demands. They walked along the river path where it ran near the Mapo district, the Han flat and gray beside them, the city across it catching what light there was. She told him about the nursing program. He asked questions, real ones, specific. The questions of someone who was interested in the answers rather than the performance of interest. She told him about Zuri's sessions with the counselor. He told her briefly and without elaboration that Junwoo's cooperation with the federal investigators had accelerated significantly, that the case was moving, that the 3 years of documentation he'd been building was now in the hands of people whose job it was to do something with it. "It's strange," he said after a while. "What is?" "Operating without—" He paused. Finding the words, which was still, she'd observed, a slightly slower process for him than everything else. "Without the constant calculation of who is working against me. I have been doing that calculation for so long that its absence feels like a missing weight." He looked at the river. "I don't know yet whether I trust the absence." "You'll learn," she said. "You sound certain." I'm not certain about much, she said, but I know that if you can survive running a criminal organization for a decade with two people at the center of it feeding everything you did to your enemies, you can learn to walk around without looking over your shoulder. She looked at him. It's a smaller skill set. The almost smile appeared, fuller than usual, enough that it cleared the line from almost and became simply a smile, brief and real, and she filed it carefully. Smaller, he said, significantly. They walked another 10 minutes in the quiet that had become, over weeks and circumstances and a great deal of compressed honesty, the kind of quiet that didn't need to be filled. The city moved around them. People with dogs, a woman pushing a stroller, a man on a bicycle with a delivery bag. The ordinary continuous motion of a place that ran on its own logic, regardless of what anyone inside it was carrying. Nyla thought about the night of the alley, the gun, the 4001, the half sandwich she'd saved out of habit and handed over to a stranger because the situation required it and she had it to give. She thought about how nothing since then had been what she planned, and how that was not the same as nothing since then being wrong. She stopped walking. He stopped a half step later and turned to look at her. She was standing on the river path with her coffee cooling in her hand and the Seoul winter doing its last work around them, and she looked at Kang Tae-hyun, at the man she had found in the dark and chosen repeatedly without obligation to stay oriented toward. And she said the thing that had been assembling itself since the kitchen table conversation, since the unfinished sentence she had left open in the morning light. I'm not finished with what I started, she said. The program, Zuri, all of it. I need to be the one who finishes it. I know, he said, and I need it to be mine, not... She gestured, a motion that indicated the estate, the resources, the infrastructure of a life organized around his. Not absorbed. I know that too. He said it without defense. I'm not trying to absorb you, Nyla. I'm trying to... He stopped, looked at the river, looked back. I'm trying to be in proximity to someone who treats me like a person and not a position, for as long as they are willing to allow it. That is what I'm trying to do. She looked at him for a long time. That's a long way of saying you want to spend time with me, she said. Yes, he said. That is a shorter way of saying it. She felt it then. The thing she had been holding at the same precise distance he'd been holding her name, keeping it there, not out of denial, but out of the correct instinct that some things became more real when given more time. She felt it and let it be there, fully, in the February morning with the river beside them and the city ahead and everything that had happened sitting behind them like terrain that had been crossed. She reached out and took his hand, not romantically, not dramatically, just took it, the way she'd taken things and given things throughout this entire story, directly and without theater, because the situation called for it and she had it to give. He looked down at their hands, then at her face. She said, "Walk with me." He walked with her. The river ran alongside them, indifferent and continuous, and souls spread out in every direction the way cities did when you stopped trying to navigate them and simply moved through them. And the winter morning turned slowly, incrementally, the way mornings did, toward something that was not yet warm but was closer to it than it had been. Behind them, the alley and the blood, and the half sandwich, and the debt, and the betrayal, and the 3 years, and the losses, and all the costs that had not been optional. Ahead of them, a nursing program, and a sister healing, and a father in Vancouver beginning the slower work of becoming accountable, and a city that was theirs to move through on their own terms. Between them, the specific gravity of two people who had met in the worst possible context and had, against all reasonable calculation, found in each other something that the worst possible context had not been able to damage. That was all it was. That was everything it was. They kept walking,